Picture this scenario, because I mean, I guarantee you have lived it. It's Sunday evening, the weekend is winding down, and you are feeling this incredible, just intoxicating wave of motivation.
Oh, yeah. The Sunday night surge.
Exactly, the Sunday night surge. Maybe you just watched a brilliantly edited documentary about a high-performance athlete. Or you finish reading a memoir by someone who completely turned their life around against all odds. You're
Right.
sitting on your couch, and you decide right then and there that you are going to completely overhaul your entire existence. Starting tomorrow, because, it always has to be a Monday,
Hmm.
you're going to wake up at 5 in the morning.
Naturally.
You're going to do a grueling 1-hour workout. You're going to meal prep perfectly macronutrient balanced lunches for the entire week. You read 30 pages of dense philosophy before bed and meditate until you achieve pure enlightenment.
It sounds so easy when you're just sitting on the couch.
It really does. And the crazy part is, for the first 3 or 4 days, you actually pull it off. You're white-knuckling your way through the new routine, running on sheer adrenaline and probably way too much caffeine, and you feel invincible.
Hmm.
But then, day 5 arrives, the alarm goes off in the pitch black, the floor is freezing, your muscles are absolutely screaming, and suddenly, that massive life-altering goal doesn't feel inspiring anymore. It feels like an oppressive, unscalable mountain.
Hmm.
You hit the snooze button, you skip the workout, you grab a processed pastry instead of your prepped meal, and by Saturday, that entire ambitious, beautiful plan is just sitting in the graveyard of abandoned weekend resolutions. We set these colossal goals, we expect to be transformed almost overnight, and when we don't wake up as a totally different human being by Thursday, we just collapse.
It is a profoundly universal cycle. And, the ensuing guilt is what usually makes it so damaging. People tend to deeply internalize that specific day 5 failure.
Yeah, they really beat themselves up.
They do. They look in the mirror and tell themselves a very dark story. They say that they lack fundamental discipline, that their willpower is defective, or that they are just structurally incapable of meaningful change. But when we actually look at the mechanics of what is happening under the hood, the reality is infinitely more complex, highly biological, and, frankly, a lot more forgiving.
And offering that forgiveness through understanding is the entire mission of this deep dive into the source material. Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to explore what we're calling the impatience transformation paradox.
It's a great term.
Thanks. We want to figure out why we culturally and biologically expect rapid identity change, and why holding on to that specific expectation almost guarantees a catastrophic failure.
And we have a phenomenal stack of research to synthesize for you today.
We really do. We're looking closely at James Clear's framework from Atomic Habits. We're pulling apart clinical psychological research on a phenomenon called false hoax syndrome. That's
Yeah.
from researchers Janet Polvey and C. Peter Herman.
Which is fascinating work.
Truly. We'll also be exploring Daryl Bem's self-perception theory. And then we're going to get into some surprisingly deep neurobiological and psychodynamic analyses of why the physical meat of your brain and the deepest layers of your subconscious actively and aggressively resist fast change.
What makes this stack of sources so compelling is how these disparate fields overlap. We're taking insights from behavioral psychology, mapping them onto cellular neuroscience, and then filtering them through existential psychoanalysis.
It builds a remarkably complete three-dimensional picture of why the human animal struggles so profoundly with the timeline of personal growth. So what is the fundamental psychological and neurological difference between a short-term behavior change and a long-term identity formation? And how can understanding that difference literally save us from our own impatience?
To even begin answering that, we have to talk about the water we are currently swimming in.
Right. Our sources highlight the work of Professor R.J. Starr, who coined the term the Amazon Prime era. We are operating in a society that has entirely rewritten our baseline expectations for how long physical and emotional processes should take.
It's not just that we like things fast, it's that our standard deviation for a normal wait time has collapsed to near zero.
Yeah, zero.
Yeah.
You want to watch a film that was released in a theater yesterday. You stream it in 4K instantly. You have a craving for a specific cuisine. A stranger navigates traffic to place it on your doormat in 25 minutes.
We have been conditioned, quite literally down to our nervous systems, to view any gap between desire and acquisition as an error in the system.
When you take that culturally conditioned expectation and try to apply it to the messy, nonlinear timeline of personal development, you create a massive neurochemical collision.
Exactly. And we know that a large portion of this audience is already familiar with the basics of dopamine. The understanding that it's not merely a reward or pleasure chemical, but rather the neurotransmitter responsible for anticipation, motivation, and the pursuit of goals.
Right.
But what Starr's work illuminates is how the temporal aspect of our dopamine circuitry has been hijacked by that Amazon Prime timeframe. Our brains have essentially been trained to expect a highly compressed gap between the spike of anticipatory dopamine, like, I want to achieve this goal, and a consummatory reward.
So when you set a goal to, say, learn a new language or completely change your physical fitness, the inherent timeline for those goals is measured in months or years.
And your modern conditioned dopamine system falters during that extended delay. The brain registers the time gap not as a natural biological necessity, but as a system failure.
So because the package didn't arrive the next day, the brain assumes the order was canceled and it just stops funding the operation.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The brain continuously monitors the effort to reward ratio. When you're putting in intense effort on day 3 of your new routine and the neurological payoff is nowhere to be found, dopamine levels plummet.
And that sudden drop is what creates that intense, skin-crawling feeling of agitation and frustration.
Yes. But we cannot look at this merely as a transient bad mood. Chronic impatience takes a severe physical toll. The frustration of waiting actually triggers the body's sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response.
Wow.
Your body literally perceives the delay in your self-improvement as a threat, releasing cortisol and adrenaline right into your bloodstream.
Which is an evolutionary mechanic designed to help you survive a predator, not to deal with the frustration that you haven't mastered a guitar chord after 3 practice sessions.
Precisely. If you are constantly setting unrealistic goals and constantly experiencing that fight or flight response when you fail to meet them instantly, you are subjecting your cardiovascular system to chronic strain.
So it's actually dangerous.
It is. The literature links chronic impatience to significantly higher risks for essential hypertension and long-term heart issues. You are essentially weathering your own heart because you cannot tolerate the timeline of your own growth.
That is terrifying.
Furthermore, if we look at this through the lens of attachment theory, the emotional toll becomes even clearer. In human development, waiting for a caregiver to respond to a need can trigger profound relational anxiety. It brings up primitive feels of abandonment or of being fundamentally undervalued.
Okay, so when we are adults trying to change our habits, we project that same relational dynamic onto our goals.
Yes. When the progress is slow, it doesn't just feel like a delay. On a subconscious level, it feels like rejection. We feel rejected by our own bodies or by the universe for not validating our effort quickly enough.
I was reading through the notes R.J. Starr compiled, and there is an anecdote that perfectly encapsulates that exact feeling of rejection. A university professor assigned a class project where the students had to track a single new habit for 2 weeks. Just 14 days of logging a behavior.
That's practically nothing.
Exactly. And a significant portion of the class experienced extreme psychological distress during the exercise because they weren't seeing life-altering results. One student actually wrote in their reflection, "If I'm putting in the effort, I should see a change now."
There it is.
That is the Amazon Prime mindset laid bare. We demand next-day delivery on neuroplasticity.
It highlights a complete detachment from the physical reality of how human beings operate. We treat ourselves like software that just needs to download and update, rather than biological organisms that need to grow new tissue.
Which forms the perfect bridge into the psychological trap that defines so much of the self-help industry. Because we have this cultural impatience, and because our dopamine systems are incredibly confused by slow timelines, we walk blindly into what Janet Polivy and C. Peter Herman call false hope syndrome.
Polivy and Herman's clinical research is foundational here. They define false hope syndrome not as a single mistake, but as a chronic, repetitive cycle.
A cycle.
Yes. It is the recurring phenomenon of embarking on a process of self-change fueled by incredibly high hopes, which are tethered to entirely unrealistic expectations. Because the expectations are detached from reality, the effort inevitably ends in failure.
But the defining characteristic of the syndrome is that, despite the pain of the failure, the individual almost immediately starts the cycle all over again with a new, equally unrealistic goal.
Exactly. They categorize these unrealistic expectations into 4 specific distortions of reality.
I want to walk through these because anyone who has ever made a New Year's resolution is going to feel slightly attacked by at least one of them. Let's start with the first distortion, speed.
The great illusion of time.
Right. We somehow convince ourselves that biological or deep-seated psychological changes can happen in a matter of days. You see this everywhere in marketing. 7 days to a totally new you. We actually believe that eating a salad on Monday and Tuesday should result in a visibly different reflection in the mirror on Wednesday.
And then the second distortion involves ease. When we are in that highly motivated Sunday night planning phase, we drastically underestimate the sheer physical and psychological friction of daily life.
Because sitting on the couch is easy.
Precisely. We assume that because making the decision to change was intellectually easy, the execution will follow suit. We fail to account for exhaustion, for unforeseen stress, for the biological resistance of old neural pathways, or simply for the reality that doing hard things feels hard.
The third distortion is amount. This is where we massively overestimate the ceiling of our potential within a confined window of time. If someone decides to start running, they don't set a goal to run a mile without stopping. They set a goal to run a marathon in 3 months, having never jogged before.
We reject incremental progress because it doesn't sound impressive enough in our own heads.
And that leads to the fourth distortion, which is arguably the most insidious: consequences.
Oh, this is a form of magical thinking.
It really is. We hold a deeply embedded, often subconscious belief that altering one specific behavioral axis, losing 20 pounds, finally organizing our garage, or getting a promotion, will act as a panacea for all of our unrelated life problems.
We attach the entire weight of our potential for happiness, our self-worth, and our relationship stability onto the success of this one isolated habit.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though. If you look at someone caught in false hope syndrome, they might fail at a new diet or a new productivity system 10 times in a single year. Logically, you would think the brain would learn that this strategy doesn't work. Why on earth do we keep touching the hot stove?
Polivy and Herman point to the trap of the initial reward. We think the reward for a goal comes at the end when you achieve it. But there is a massive neurochemical reward that happens the second you simply make the decision to change.
Think about the high you get when you buy a brand new expensive daily planner, or when you download a complex new budget tracking app. You haven't actually saved any money or organized your life yet, but you suddenly feel an overwhelming surge of optimism and a sense of absolute control of your destiny.
You are hacking your own reward system. By purchasing the planner or declaring the grand intention, you are granting yourself an early, entirely unearned psychological success. The feeling of being in control acts as an interim reinforcement.
So you get the high without the work.
Exactly. Your brain gets to try on the identity of the new, perfect you without having to endure any of the friction required to actually become that person. This is why the cycle of endless goal setting becomes literally addictive. People continually engage in the setup phase of self-improvement because the setup phase feels incredible.
Yeah.
It functions as a form of emotional self-medication to alleviate the stress of their current reality.
That dynamic is perfectly explained by the research of Daniel Gilbert and Jonathan Haidt on effective forecasting. We are generally terrible at predicting the future, but we are specifically terrible at predicting how a future event will actually make us feel.
We set these enormous, impossible goals based on wildly exaggerated hallucinations of our future happiness.
I think if I could just hit this revenue number in my business, I will achieve a state of permanent, unshakable peace.
Yet the data on effective forecasting shows that when we actually reach those monumental milestones, the resulting happiness is almost universally less intense and significantly shorter in duration than we projected.
The hedonic treadmill.
Precisely. But the real danger lies in the journey itself. When you are slogging through the difficult, unglamorous process of trying to reach the goal, the gap between the mundane reality of the present moment and that wildly exaggerated utopian hallucination of the future creates profound dissatisfaction.
You become hopelessly impatient because the present moment feels like an intolerable punishment compared to the fantasy world you have built in your mind.
If we logically understand that our expectations are warped, and we know our ability to predict our future feelings is flawed, why does the emotional urge for immediate transformation still overpower us?
Right. I can read all the behavioral psychology in the world, but when I'm stuck in traffic or waiting for a slow Wi-Fi connection, I still feel like I'm going to explode. To understand the sheer velocity of that impatience, the sources suggest we have to dig underneath the behavioral layer and look at the deep subconscious.
This is where we transition into the psychoanalytic realm, which provides a much heavier but arguably more accurate explanation for why waiting feels so agonizing. From a psychodynamic perspective, the feeling of impatience is not merely a cognitive error or a minor annoyance. It is a robust psychological defense mechanism deployed against existential dread.
I love how quickly we just escalated from getting annoyed at a slow Wi-Fi router to confronting the terrifying abyss of human mortality.
Yeah, don't mess around here.
Clearly. Connect those dots for me. How does Freud explain my inability to stick to a 30-day fitness challenge?
It is grounded in Sigmund Freud's conceptualization of the foundational human drives. Thanatos, the death instinct, and eros, the life instinct. Freud posited that beneath all our daily concerns, humans harbor a deep, humming, unconscious awareness of our own finitude.
We know we're going to die.
We know, on a cellular level, that the clock is ticking and our time on Earth is strictly limited. When you commit to changing your identity, say building a completely new career, you inevitably enter a protracted waiting room. You are putting in the daily labor, but the results are entirely invisible.
And being trapped in that state of limbo acutely and painfully reminds you of the passage of time.
Precisely.
So every day that I am grinding away without seeing the finish line feels like a tangible measurement of my life slipping away. It's the same anxiety that flares up around milestone birthdays. You look at where you are versus where you thought you would be, and the gap feels like a threat to your existence.
Exactly. The frantic demand for instant, overnight change acts as a psychological shield against that reality. If we can force rapid transformation, if we can lose the weight in a week or double our income in a month, we create the illusion that we are mastering time itself.
We convince ourselves that we have outpaced the ticking clock.
When the universe refuses to yield to that accelerated timeline, the illusion shatters, and we are left with a primitive existential panic. The impatience you feel isn't really about the diet or the career. It is the raw anxiety of mortality leaking into your conscious awareness.
And the sources dive into developmental psychology to show that this panic doesn't just come from the fear of death. It is also rooted in how we learn to conceptualize time as infants. The work of Donald Winnicott and his theory of the holding environment completely reframes why some of us are so bad at waiting.
Winnicott's contributions are vital to understanding our adult neuroses around time. The capacity to tolerate a delay, to sit with an unmet need without descending into total psychological collapse, is not innate. It is a learned skill. It is developed in early childhood when a primary caregiver creates a sufficient holding environment. In practice, this means the caregiver responds to the infant's needs reliably, but crucially, not instantaneously.
There's a gap.
There is a necessary marginal gap between the infant crying for food and the arrival of the milk. Within that small, tolerable gap, the child learns a foundational truth. Delay does not equal abandonment. The need will be met, even if it is not met this very second.
But if that holding environment is fractured, if the caregiver is wildly inconsistent, or alternatively, if they are a helicopter parent who instantly pacifies the child before the child even registers a need, the mechanism for tolerating delay never develops properly.
Yes. When those children become adults and are faced with the protracted delays required for self-improvement, they lack the emotional scaffolding to handle it. The frustration of slow progress doesn't just feel like a setback. It triggers a primitive, infant-like terror that their needs will never be met.
So they quit.
They quit their goals not out of laziness, but to escape a feeling of fundamental helplessness. We can also overlay Melanie Klein's theory of projection here. Klein suggested that when we experience unbearable internal anxieties, we project them outward onto external objects or situations to make them manageable.
So if the slow process of trying to write a novel or learn to code is bringing up all my deep-seated fears that I am fundamentally unintelligent or untalented, I don't want to sit with that internal distress that is too painful.
Right, so instead of confronting the fear of your own inadequacy, you project that frustration onto the process itself. You declare that the coding bootcamp is flawed, or the writing method is stupid, or that you just don't have the time.
You demand an instant magical solution to alleviate the painful internal distress that the slow process of growth has unearthed.
To bring this out of the clinical jargon and into everyday life, think about the last time you were trapped in a sluggish line at the grocery store. Or stuck behind a slow driver when you were already running late.
Oh, the worst.
Think about the visceral, almost violent temperature change in your body. Your jaw clenches, your heart rate spikes, you feel this boiling, disproportionate rage. If we take Freud and Winnicott seriously, you weren't actually that angry about the groceries.
You were experiencing a subconscious panic about wasted life. You were projecting your existential dread onto the poor cashier.
Exactly.
Now imagine taking that intense, boiling subconscious panic and applying it to a goal that takes 2 years to achieve. It becomes incredibly obvious why people just abandon ship. The psychological pressure of the waiting room is simply too heavy to bear.
It is exhausting just to conceptualize. We are fighting a cultural landscape that demands instant gratification, cognitive distortions that hallucinate false futures, and deeply buried existential terrors regarding our own mortality.
But to fully complete this picture, we have to recognize that the resistance isn't just in the ethereal realm of the mind. It is rooted in the literal physical meat of the brain. The brain is an organ, much like a liver or a femur, and physical remodeling operates on a strict biological timeline.
This introduces the neurobiology of what our sources call the inference lag. When we casually talk about forming a new habit or changing our mindset, we use very abstract language. But what we are literally talking about is altering the physical structure and density of neural pathways.
You cannot speed run that process with a motivational quote any more than you can yell at a broken arm to fuse its bones together faster.
The structural limitations of the brain are best understood by looking at the interaction between two very different regions, the prefrontal cortex and the striatum, along with the broader basal ganglia. The prefrontal cortex, or PFC, is the evolutionary newcomer. It is your executive command center. It handles logic, abstract future planning, and immediate decision-making.
When you sit down on Sunday night and declare, I am a person who wakes up at 5 a.m., that is your PSC, performing a rapid high-level calculation, it can pivot its intention in a microsecond.
But the PFC does not control what you actually do on autopilot at 5 a.m. when you are half asleep. That job belongs to the striatum, which is like the stubborn, deeply entrenched factory floor of your brain.
The PFC is the visionary CEO sending down an aggressive new memo. But the striatum is the unionized machinery that requires weeks to actually retool the assembly line.
That analogy is neurologically spot on. The PSC has to train the striatum to adopt the new behavior so that it eventually becomes automated and requires zero conscious willpower. And this training protocol is heavily reliant on a specific physiological mechanism, beta band synchronization, and the subsequent thickening of myelin.
Let's slow down and really unpack this because understanding myelin completely changed how I view my own failures. How does the CEO actually talk to the factory floor?
It communicates through rhythmic electrical impulses. Think of beta band synchronization like a metronome in an orchestra. The PFC starts firing in a specific beta frequency band, trying to establish a rhythm. The striatum has to catch that rhythm and synchronize its own firing to match.
Okay, so they have to get on the same beat.
When these two regions fire together repeatedly in perfect sync over a new behavior, it signals the surrounding glial cells in the brain, specifically oligodendrocytes, to get to work. These cells begin wrapping a fatty substance called myelin around the axon of the neural pathway.
So it is literally physical insulation, like taking a cheap, frayed charging cable and wrapping it in layers of thick rubber electrical tape so the signal doesn't leak out.
Exactly that. The thicker the myelin sheath, the faster, stronger, and more effortless the electrical signal becomes. A heavily myelinated pathway is what makes a seasoned piano player able to execute a complex sonata while simultaneously holding a conversation. Their neural circuitry is so insulated that the behavior requires almost zero executive effort.
But here is the critical bottleneck. Wrapping an axon in fat takes time. You cannot force a cell to produce myelin faster by simply wanting it really badly. It requires consistent, repeated, specific action over an extended duration to physically lay down the tissue.
And this is where our neurochemistry betrays us, taking us right back to the dopamine crash we discussed earlier. The sources detail the role of the ventral striatum in generating prediction errors.
Our brains are fundamentally prediction machines.
They are. When you set that massive goal on Sunday, your brain calculates the expected future reward. If you hold the distortion of speed, your brain predicts that by day 7, you will look and feel like an Olympian, which translates to a massive payout of dopamine.
But reality eventually intervenes. Day 7 arrives, your muscles ache, your clothes fit exactly the same, and the brain transformation hasn't materialized. The ventral striatum compares the actual reality to the wildly inflated prediction, and it registers a severe negative prediction error.
In the language of the brain, a negative prediction error means this behavior is inefficient and is burning precious calories without yielding the promised return. The brain immediately pulls the funding.
It slashes your dopamine levels,
Resulting in an absolute crash in motivation. You wake up on day 8, and the thought of going to the gym literally fills you with apathy or dread.
So we have a biological system that is physically slow to rewire due to the mechanics of myelin, paired with an emotional system that throws a catastrophic tantrum when rewards are delayed. If we are structurally designed to fail at rapid change, how do we hack the system? How do we work alongside our biology instead of constantly fighting a losing battle against it?
This is where we must initiate a fundamental paradigm shift in how we structure our ambitions. We have to completely abandon the concept of outcome-based habits and shift all of our focus toward identity-based habits.
James Clear's Atomic Habits is the definitive source text for this framework. He uses an incredibly helpful visual analogy. Imagine behavior change as an onion with three distinct layers.
The layers of change.
Exactly. The outermost layer is outcomes. This is the realm of results. Losing 20 pounds, publishing a novel, or saving $10,000. The middle layer is processes. This is the realm of action. Going to the gym 4 times a week, writing 500 words a morning, or setting up an automatic financial transfer.
And the innermost layer, the deep core of the onion, is identity. This is the realm of belief. I am an athlete, I am a writer, or I am financially responsible.
The fatal flaw in how most people approach self-improvement is that they work from the outside in. They fixate entirely on the outer layer, the outcome. They say, I want to lose 20 pounds. They then implement a grueling process to achieve it.
But because the focus is on the outcome, the habit is built entirely on extrinsic motivation. You are creating a conditional, almost transactional relationship with your own behavior. I will subject myself to this miserable diet only until the scale hits my target number.
And we all know exactly what happens the millisecond that target number is reached. The condition of the contract has been met, the goal is achieved. Therefore, the motivation to continue the miserable process evaporates into thin air. You stop the diet, you stop the gym, and within 6 months, the 20 pounds are back. It is the classic yo-yo effect.
It happens because the inner layer, the identity, was never addressed. The person never fundamentally changed who they were. They were still a person who desired a sedentary lifestyle and junk food, but they were temporarily white-knuckling a restrictive process.
Identity-based habits operate from the inside out. They are rooted in intrinsic motivation. When you build a habit based on identity, you aren't doing the behavior to reach a terminal finish line. You're doing the behavior because it reaffirms and aligns with your core belief about who you are.
The resilience of an identity-based habit is incredible. Let's say you have an outcome-based goal to run a marathon. If you get a minor injury and miss a week and a half of training, your entire goal is suddenly in jeopardy. You feel like a failure, and you are highly likely to abandon the marathon entirely.
But if your core identity is simply, I am a runner, and you miss a week and a half because life happens, well, it doesn't shatter your worldview. A runner who misses a week is still fundamentally a runner. The identity remains intact. You just wait for the injury to heal, and you lace up your shoes again on Tuesday. There is no existential crisis.
What is genuinely fascinating about this transition is understanding why altering that innermost core, the identity, feels so incredibly heavy and psychologically dangerous to us. The research highlights a concept known as the moral self-effect,
Which is such a profound idea.
When psychologists study how humans construct their sense of self, they find that we do not primarily define our core essence by our memories, our physical appearance, or our arbitrary preferences. We define our core self through our moral traits qualities like honesty, virtue, discipline, and reliability.
So if I have spent a decade viewing myself as a disciplined, hardworking person, that isn't just a fun fact about me. It is a load-bearing pillar of my psychological architecture.
Yes, and attempting to rapidly alter those pillars, even if you are trying to upgrade them to something better, triggers a profound threat to what is called psychological continuity. This is our deep-seated need to feel that we are the exact same conscious entity today that we were yesterday.
We subconsciously sabotage fast identity change because, on an evolutionary and psychological level, it registers as self-annihilation. To fully become the new, healthy you, the old, comfortable you has to effectively die. We resist the new habits because letting go of the old habits feels like losing a piece of our very existence.
That is a staggering realization. We cling to our toxic habits and our procrastination because, in a twisted way, they are familiar friends. Letting them go feels like a psychological death.
But this brings us to a massive practical roadblock. If my identity is fiercely protected by my subconscious, how do I actually change it? I can't just stand in front of a mirror, look at my out-of-shape body, say I am a marathon runner 3 times, and expect my brain to magically adopt that belief. The brain is too smart for cheap affirmations.
You absolutely cannot trick the brain with mere words. This is where we introduce the pivotal work of Daryl Bem and his self-perception theory, or SPT. For decades, the conventional wisdom in psychology operated on a very logical, linear model. Your internal attitudes and beliefs dictate your external behaviors. You hold a belief that you are an organized person, and therefore you clean your desk.
Bem completely inverted this model. He theorized that it is actually the other way around. We do not form beliefs in a vacuum and then act on them. Instead, we act first, we observe our own behavior from a third-party perspective, and then we deduce what our internal beliefs must be based on the physical evidence of our actions.
The classic foundational illustration of this is the famous cartoon experiment. Researchers brought participants into a lab under the guise of testing physical coordination. They had them hold a pen in their mouths while rating the humor of various newspaper cartoons.
One group was instructed to hold the pen tightly between their lips. The physical mechanics of this essentially forced the mouth into a pout, preventing the activation of the zygomaticus major, the smiling muscles.
And the second group was instructed to hold the pen horizontally between their teeth, which mechanically forces the face into a broad smile.
So you have half the room frowning around a pen and half the room grinning like maniacs around a pen, but neither group knows why.
Precisely. The researchers then asked both groups to rate how funny the cartoons were. The group whose facial muscles were physically forced into a smile rated the cartoons as significantly and consistently funnier than the frowning group.
According to self-perception theory, the brain of a participant in the smiling group was continually receiving physical feedback from the facial muscles. The brain acts as an independent observer and concludes, well, my zygomaticus major is fully engaged. I am smiling, therefore, I must find this material highly amusing.
The brain says, I am doing it, therefore I must believe it. When we apply this to habit formation, it changes everything. It means your brain is constantly watching your actions like a skeptical jury in a courtroom.
If the jury sees you consistently choosing to read a book instead of scrolling on your phone for a week, it starts to deliberate. It says, we keep choosing literature over cheap dopamine. We must be a reader. The behavior creates the identity.
But, and this is the crucial caveat that trips everyone up, there is an inference lag. The brain is a rigorous scientist. It requires a statistically significant sample size before it will publish a new conclusion. It will not update your core identity label after one day of eating a salad.
It has to observe the new behavior consistently over time, and it has to verify that the behavior is freely chosen, not coerced.
And during that lag time, the weeks or months where you are putting in the effort but the brain hasn't fully updated the identity, you are living in a state of intense cognitive dissonance. You are acting like an athlete, but your internal software still holds the label of a couch potato. That dissonance is biologically designed to be uncomfortable.
To navigate the sheer agony of that dissonance, our sources point to the Bridges transition model, developed by William Bridges. He noted that all human transitions, whether corporate reorganizations or personal identity shifts, must pass through three distinct psychological phases: endings, the neutral zone, and new beginnings.
We are very good at the ending, the dramatic Sunday night declaration that the old ways are dead, and we covet the new beginning, the utopian future.
But the neutral zone is where dreams go to die.
Yes. The neutral zone is the chaotic, terrifying, messy middle. It is the void. The old identity has been dismantled, but the new identity is still under construction. You are floating in an ambiguous limbo. All of the impatience, the existential dread, and the frustration we have discussed culminate as a desperate, agonizing urge to escape the neutral zone.
We want to fast forward the tape. We want to skip the void.
But the cruel irony is that you cannot skip it. The neutral zone is the exact location where the biological repatterning takes place. It is the kiln where the clay is fired. It is where the oligodendrocytes are slowly wrapping myelin around your new neural pathways.
It is the courtroom where your brain is gathering the behavioral evidence to update your identity. If you panic and quit because the neutral zone feels deeply uncomfortable, the repatterning process aborts, and you snap right back to your old self.
So the ultimate question becomes, how do we survive the neutral zone? How do we build an identity-based habit without getting completely derailed by our own biology, our flawed cultural expectations, and our existential panic?
This is exactly where we pivot into the practical, actionable application. We have diagnosed the disease, now let's administer the cure. Based on the synthesis of James Clear, Daryl Bem, and the neurobiological data, we have extracted 4 core strategies for patient long-term transformation. Let's break these down.
Strategy 1 is centered around casting votes and leveraging microactions. If we truly internalize self-perception theory, the reality that your brain infers who you are strictly from what you do, then we must view every single action we take as a vote cast in the ballot box for the type of person we want to become.
And the most liberating aspect of a democratic voting system is that you do not need a unanimous, flawless victory to win the election. You merely need a majority. If you go for a run in the morning, you cast a strong vote for the athlete identity. If you eat a massive bowl of ice cream at midnight, you cast a vote for the old identity.
You don't have to be a perfect robot. You simply have to ensure that, over the span of a month, the ballot box contains more votes for the new identity than the old one. The brain will tally the votes and update the inference.
To guarantee that you cast those votes, James Clear advocates intensely for the 2-minute rule. The premise is that you must scale your desired new habit down so drastically that it requires almost zero friction and is virtually impossible to fail.
If your grand outcome is to read 50 books a year, your daily habit is not to read a chapter a day. Your daily habit is to read exactly one page. If your goal is to become a marathoner, your habit is to simply put on your running shoes, step outside, and walk for 2 minutes.
When you first hear the 2-minute rule, it sounds almost insulting to your ambition. Your ego flares up and says, reading a single paragraph a day isn't going to turn me into an intellectual powerhouse.
But that misses the entire neurobiological point. The goal of the 2-minute rule is not the physical output or the caloric burn. The goal is entirely about logging a behavioral vote to feed into the brain's inference engine. You are providing the physical evidence that you are someone who shows up.
As Clear profoundly states, you have to standardize before you can optimize. You cannot improve, tweak, or scale a habit that doesn't consistently exist in your daily routine.
Strategy 2 requires a deep understanding of the math of compounding and what is known as the plateau of latent potential. This directly combats the cognitive distortion of that we discussed earlier. We have to violently recalibrate our expectations regarding the timeline of visible progress.
Clear uses the mathematical reality of 1% improvements. If you get just 1% better at a task every single day for a year, the compounding effect is astronomical. 1.01 to the power of 365 equals 37.78. You are nearly 38 times better by the end of the year.
But the psychological trap is that compounding curves are flat at the beginning. They are heavily delayed. This creates the plateau of latent potential, which many refer to as the valley of disappointment. You are putting in the daily work, casting your votes, doing your 2 minutes, but externally, absolutely nothing is changing. The scale isn't moving. The bank account looks the same.
Clear uses a brilliant analogy here of an ice cube sitting in a room that is 25 degrees. You slowly heat the room, 26, 27, 28 degrees. You're putting in energy, but the ice cube does not change. You hit 31 degrees, still a solid block of ice. It feels like your effort is wasted. But when you hit 32 degrees, it melts.
The work you did at 26 degrees wasn't wasted. It was being stored. It was latent potential. To survive the neutral zone, you must continuously remind yourself that when you feel like you are plateauing, you are simply storing potential energy. The breakthrough is a delayed resulting event, not an immediate consequence.
Strategy 3 is environment design, utilizing Clear's 4 laws of behavior change. If we accept that the striatum is a stubborn factory floor that loves the path of least resistance, we should stop relying on the CEO's willpower to force change. Instead, engineer the physical environment so that the new habit is the absolute easiest, most default option available.
The 4 laws are simple. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
Let's focus on the mechanics of making it obvious and easy. A highly effective technique is habit stacking. The brain already has strongly myelinated pathways for your current routines. You can leverage those existing pathways by anchoring a new, fragile habit to a solid, established one.
The syntactic formula is, after current established habit, I will execute new microhabit. For instance, after I turn on the coffee maker in the morning, I will immediately do 2 push-ups. You aren't relying on a vague time of day. You are tying the behavior to a concrete, unavoidable environmental cue.
And managing friction is the ultimate hack for making things easy. We are incredibly lazy creatures by design. If you want to run in the morning, sleep in your workout clothes and put your running shoes literally blocking the doorway of your bedroom. You have removed every physical barrier between waking up and executing the habit.
Conversely, you must artificially maximize the friction for your bad habits. If your goal is to stop mindlessly binge-watching television after work, simply turning off the TV isn't enough. You need to unplug the television, take the batteries out of the remote control, and lock the remote in a drawer in the furthest room of your house. Make the bad habit so physically annoying and tedious to engage in that your lazy brain decides it isn't worth the effort.
Finally, strategy 4 involves tracking as evidence collection. This means utilizing analog visual trackers, like moving a marble from one glass jar to another every time you complete a task, or using heavily visual digital systems like the Habby app mentioned in our research stack.
Tracking is so wildly misunderstood. People think of it purely as a guilt trip mechanism or a way to hold yourself accountable to a boss. But when you look at it through the lens of Daryl Bem and self-perception theory, tracking takes on a profound neurocognitive necessity.
It provides the skeptical jury in your brain with literal, visual, irrefutable evidence that the identity shift is real.
It functions as objective courtroom evidence. Your brain can easily dismiss a vague memory of working out a few days ago. But when you have a physical calendar on your wall with 20 massive red X's crossing off the days you executed your habit, the brain cannot argue with the raw data. It is forced to reconcile the dissonance.
The visual weight of the tracking forces the cognitive inference to update. Consistent tracking is the final mechanism that cements the new identity into your psychological architecture.
When we pull all the way back and look at the massive landscape we've covered today, the most comforting realization is that your impatience is not a character flaw. It is not a moral failing. It is a highly complex, deeply ingrained biological, cultural, and existential stress response.
You are reacting to a hyper-accelerated culture, the agonizing slowness of your own cellular biology, and the profound psychological vulnerability required to let an old version of yourself die.
And acknowledging the mechanics of that reality is what ultimately sets you free. True, durable, long-term transformation relies on what James Clear refers to as goalless thinking. It is the realization that the finish line is a mirage. The process is not a means to an end. The process is the entirety of the point.
It is an endless, patient cycle of casting votes and refining the system. You aren't trying to achieve a static outcome. You're trying to become the type of person who simply, naturally executes the behaviors.
I love that. It takes all the pressure off tomorrow and puts the power entirely in what you do for 2 minutes today. Which brings us to a final, underlying paradigm shift I want to offer to you. We have spent this entire deep dive dissecting the pain of the neutral zone. But the next time you set out to build a new habit and you hit day 5 and you feel that intense, skin-crawling wave of frustration and impatience, that overwhelming urge to abandon the project because it simply isn't happening fast enough, I want you to pause.
What if you chose not to interpret that specific feeling as a signal of your own failure?
What if instead you realize that this exact uncomfortable friction is the literal biological sensation of oligodendrocytes wrapping thick layers of myelin around your axons? What if that frustration is the sound of your psychological identity agonizingly but successfully repatterning itself? What if you could learn to savor that precise discomfort because it is the exact feeling of your new self being born?
What a staggering way to reframe the struggle. The discomfort isn't the enemy trying to stop you. It is the physical evidence of the work being done. Thank you so much for joining us on this exhaustive deep dive into the source material. We genuinely hope this synthesis helps you survive the neutral zone and cast a few more microvotes for the person you are becoming today. Until next time, embrace the friction, trust the lag, and be extraordinarily patient with your myelin.